Hi, this is JP Miller with Reach. Today we're going to work through the Wisdom for Sale tutorial together. In Wisdom for Sale, we're going to have two participants similar to Alice and Bob, but in this tutorial we call them buyer and seller. As part of this tutorial, we're going to create a participant interact interface, which is the architecture of a Reach DApp. So let's hop into that. The first thing we'll want to do is create a couple files. I've already created a directory for myself, WS for Wisdom for Sale, and I do have Reach installed. If you haven't installed Reach yet, then definitely check out our video showing you how to install Reach, or look in the description below. We'll have links to the tutorial, source code, and the installation video in the description. So let's touch a couple of files. We'll create our backend file, index.rsh, and then index.mjs, our front end, our test suite file. And we'll open up our VS Code, and we'll start hacking. Okay, maximize that. Yeah, my extensions are already closed, but here we have our files. So today we'll begin in the front end. You can begin in the back end or the front end, and either one is okay, whatever you like. To begin, our first thing that we'll do is begin to build the architecture of our application. We'll begin with the front end, so let's get into that. So the first thing we'll do here is import our standard library, and that will be coming from Reach standard library. So cd-lib, and then we'll import our backend. And when we build the backend as index.rsh, but once the Reach compiler finishes its job of compiling that program and connecting it to the consensus network or the blockchain of your choice, then it produces it in a build folder in a file called index.main.mjs. And so we'll be loading that in. I think I forgot the word as there. Oh, wrong side there. Here we go. That's where it goes. And then let's set up our role of seller. So we're in our front end here, and we're going to set up our interact objects and set up some console messages for our users so that they know who they are. And here in a moment, we'll create another message so that users know that they're connected. Okay. That does that, and now we'll load in our standard library. We'll give our standard library a constant so that it's easy to call. And we'll let our user know that they're connected to the network. All right. And so this will say what network our user is connected to. Cool. Now we'll begin creating the interact objects. So in Reach, the backend mirrors the front end. And in the backend, we have an interact interface, and in the front end, we have interact objects. And they will share names, and the one informs the other as to the functionality and when those methods can be ran or when they should be executed. So let's start with our common interact. And we'll define our seller. And we'll say if the role is seller, then we'll give some commands for the program to follow. And we need to wrap this in quotes. There we go. So if they're the seller, they're going to inherit the seller interact object, the functionality in here, which for now we'll just have common interact be included in seller interact, and that's all we'll write for this moment. Okay, and then let's carry on with the else statement. So if we're not the seller, of course we'll be someone else. And this is for the buyer. So if we're not the seller, we're the buyer, as we defined our participants for application. And the buyer will also inherit the common interact methods Okay, and inside of, so between seller and buyer, we're going to attach to the contract, or excuse me, we're going to deploy the contract. So we'll set up our account constant, and we will provide our DevNet participants with tokens. So this is creating a new test account and loading that account with 1,000 atomic units of currency. Okay. And then we'll deploy the contract. All right. And tell that participant to wait. Okay, so that'll be our front end for the time being. And so what we've done here is we've imported our standard library, imported our backend, created a role for the seller, and given the standard library a name. And then we've provided our user with a couple of messages to let them know that they're the seller and what network they're connected to. We've created empty interact objects for common interact, and seller interact and buyer interact are empty for all purposes except for inheriting anything that's inside of common interact or will be inside of that. Okay. And then we have created the account and allowed our participants to transform their units from standard to atomic units. So inherit 1,000 standard tokens, and the contract will convert that to atomic units. People usually, or participants usually, like to see their currency in a standard unit, which shows the whole number and the partial, or the decimal. But the contract itself reads numbers in atomic units, which are entire integers, right? So it's the atomic unit of that currency. Okay. All right, and so now we'll go to our front end, or excuse me, we've abandoned our front end. We're going to go to the back end. So let's hop over there. Back end always starts with the same statement, and that's at this point in time it's Reach 0.1, which tells the compiler what version of Reach that they should compile to. And we're going to create objects that are familiar to you at this point. So the common interact. So here we're defining our the interact interface. And as I mentioned, the back end mirrors the front end. And so we'll have this mirror here. And so we have common interact, who currently has no methods, no functions, no functionality. Seller interact and the buyer interact, which are largely the same. The only thing that they have at the moment is the common interact, which also happens to be empty. So we're just setting up the shell of our scaffolding, the skeleton of our structure. Okay, and then here we will create and this top part is what we call evaluation mode. And in this evaluation mode, in this program, we have our interact interfaces, and now we're beginning the app initialization mode with export const main equals reach.app. This is a common pattern that you'll be good to memorize, and this always creates the app initialization mode. And we'll set up a couple of participants. So in here is our participant interact interface. And so we can break that statement down word by word. So participants, I like to think of them as actors in our program. And then we have the interact, which really is communication, a communication between one another and communication between the contract. And then an interface. An interface is like a console or a user interface, right? So something that can be interacted with and manipulated in some way. So there they have the participant interact interface. And essentially what we're saying is that we are defining the rules by which our participants will interact with one another in the contract and how the user shall interface with those participants. And then we initialize the DApp with init. That takes us out of the app init mode. And then our last step here is an exit, which once we're in a step, we have the ability to exit. So this will close the contract. And so let's take a look here. We'll run it very quickly. We are not expecting any great results here. I mean, it should compile and run for us, but nothing much beyond that. So I like to do a reach compile first to make sure that my backend is good, and it is. We have no failures, and we verify. There's just a warning message that this DApp has no publications, and we know that we're just getting started. So we can kind of deconstruct this compile a bit. So we have a warning message. It tells us what the warning is and gives us a URL to our documentation where you can read more about this error. And then we have the verification engine, which runs and is verifying proofs regarding our DApp that is created with symbolic module theories, and verify formal verification when all participants are honest and when no participants are honest. And in this case, we checked one theorem. There's no failures, and so we exit. Okay, that's great. Let's do a reach run now. Reach run, we'll see that it does a little more. So we're building our program here, and it's loading the information in the Docker. So Reach is a Dockerized system, so you do need Docker and Docker Compose. And here we've run our program. There's no errors, and we see our two console messages. So your role is seller, and the consensus network is ETH at this point in time. Okay, so you have now created the beginning architecture of our DApp, and in the next video, we'll carry this forward. And check the links below in the description.